to make sure to do an acknowledgement of traditional lands. And Royal Roads University acknowledges that the campus is located on the traditional lands of the Cosetsun, Esquimalt, and Lekwungen Songhees ancestors and families who have lived here for thousands of years. This land has been part of the fabric of the life of Indigenous communities long before Hatley Castle was built, and it will be long into the future. It is with gratitude that we learn and work here with the past, present, and future of Indigenous and non-Indigenous students, faculty, and staff, where we all come together. And I am so excited to introduce Michael Pardee, who is the organizer of the Design Thinking Challenge, and he's also an associate faculty here at Royal Roads University. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Imara, and good morning, everybody. I see some familiar faces and some new faces coming into this, so welcome to the folks that are joining us from outside our Design Challenge, and welcome to the folks that are here with me on day 3 of our Design Challenge. I'm just going to give a quick overview of the challenge and then get right into introducing our keynote speakers. So this is the 5th year that we've run the Design Challenge at Royal Roads. And the Design Challenge is an opportunity for business students to engage with a problem at the interface between business and society through a process of design. And every year we identify an issue, a contemporary and current issue, and help work with the students to use design to help work through and solve that, solve those challenges. This year we're working with the Wilderness Tourism Association of BC and looking at how they and their members can respond more effectively to the impact of COVID on tourism and wilderness tourism specifically here in BC. As a part of the event every year, we bring in a couple of speakers on this day of the challenge to provide yet another kind of perspective on the issue that we're addressing. So this year we've invited Ross Cloutier and Brock Hart to join us. Ross comes from the tourism sector and Brock comes from the design sector. Part of the challenge is really to make sure that we're dealing with real people with real problems in real time. And as a part of that commitment, when we identify our keynote speakers, we always try to bring someone from the sector that we're working with, and then also somebody from the design community. So we're always playing, those two realities off against each other. That's just the big picture overview. I want to cognizant of the time here, and I want to make sure that I do justice to the time we've set aside for the keynote speakers. So without further ado, I am going to quickly introduce Ross and then turn the screen over to him. So Ross is an internationally acclaimed risk management and adventure tourism development consultant. He's worked in this capacity all over the world. He's written dozens of consultant reports, publications, experts' opinions, and business strategies. And he continues to work in this sector in many capacities, including as the Executive Director of Helicat Canada. And I'll just quickly say that I first ran across Ross through his written work. And so it's a real pleasure to have him joining us because he is a long-standing and very influential figure in tourism here in BC. So thank you, Ross, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Michael. Just give me a thumbs up that you can hear me and we're all good to go. Hello, everybody. Thanks for the invitation, Michael and Royal Roads. It's just excellent to be here and I really appreciate it. I really like what's going on with the competition, and good luck to all the students and the teams that are competing. What I want to do today is I'm going to talk to you, the students, and I know there's other people on here, and I'll probably do half an hour or so, and then if you've got questions. One of the things if you're doing speakers with Zooms is you need to make the speaker feel comfortable. The best way to do that is to have a question or two at the end. Otherwise they wonder if everybody shut off and went back to bed. You know, as Michael said, I've worked kind of all over the place around the world, really. And, you know, one of the things that you're up against when we're going to talk about COVID and we're going to talk about adventure tourism business and that kind of stuff. But one of the interesting things is that no matter where the destination is, you're competing with all kinds of other destinations. And British Columbia is no exception. So the Wilderness Tourism Association have lots of members here in BC. They run great businesses, but you know, this map that I've got up here, you know, that's probably a pretty good indication of where I work historically and that kind of thing. My business probably falls into kind of two fields for the most part for the past kind of 47 years, and that's been business development and destination development, building adventure economies, really. And then I spend about half my time in the helicopter and snowcat ski sector here in British Columbia. And most of that work is lobbying work, advocacy work. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'll use them as a bit of a case study today to kind of talk about some of the challenges that the adventure tourism sector is facing and some of the characteristics and things like that of it. And we'll just kind of use that as a case study. I could talk about other businesses, but we'll just kind of do that. So most of this you probably know, but in British Columbia, you know, we have about $21.5 billion per year of tourism sales and sort of gross sales, right? Income. And, you know, it's all export business. So not all of it, but 70% of, you know, British Columbia tourism, Canadian tourism, are Canadians, and then the other 30% are foreign guests. And out of the adventure tourism sector, we sell about $3 to $4 billion. We're not totally sure where that fits. So you can see that, you know, it's a portion, maybe 15% or so of the overall tourism sales. But from a branding perspective in BC, it really probably plays a more important kind of piece than that. I mean, you guys have all seen, and I know there's 12 schools from kind of all over North America here, but you've all seen the branding and the kind of imaging that British Columbia uses. This supernatural British Columbia is their tagline, and all their marketing's built around that. They've tried a couple other things a few decades ago, didn't go that well for them, but you can see that in all their imaging, you know, they're playing this whole adventure tourism game. Now we've got a holistic tourism industry here. There's real strong events and conventions and hotels and all of that. I mean, clearly, right? But the branding and imaging for British Columbia is kind of overweighted, I suppose, towards the adventure tourism kind of images in that sense. And you can do anything here. Spring in British Columbia is a fantastic time over the next couple of months because in a day, in any given day, you can paddle, you can ski, you can sea kayak, you can ice climb, you can sail, you can hike, you can ride your mountain bikes, any of that stuff. So spring is just a fantastic adventure tourism season here. And it's a long-standing kind of business in Canada. So when the railroad was finished in 1885, the Canadian Pacific Railroad, it was finished in British Columbia, kind of Rogers Pass, kind of where the last spike was pounded. And the railroad was given 10 miles on either side of the tracks of the land from the government in order to sell as a way to pay for the railroad. And so they did that. They sold to farmers and they imported farmers from Europe and things. And that's our kind of immigration policy. But at the same time, they decided that they needed to develop a tourism product. And so they built a series of spectacular hotels. Victoria has one, Banff has one, Rogers Pass had one, Lake Louise had one, and all those kind of things. And they imported Swiss and Austrian mountain guides in the 1880s in order to develop that tourism business. So mountain guiding in Canada and skiing and horseback riding and some of those kind of things go way back to the 1880s. And it was really healthy until about, you know, the mid-teens when the First World War came, and then things, you know, completely stopped until really First World War, Depression, Second World War. And then in the 60s and late 50s, it started to expand again to today where it's a significant economic player and has a fair bit of clout. So if we looked at, just as a case study, now this could be any number of adventure tourism sectors today, and that's how we kind of speak the language, right? You've got, out of tourism, you got a whole bunch of kind of sectors in there, events and conventions and hotels and restaurants and all of that. But you've also got this whole adventure tourism kind of segment. So I'm going to talk a little bit about helicopter and snowcat skiing, but we could be talking about sailing, we could be talking about bear viewing, hunting, sport fishing, salmon fishing, any of those kind of things. So the Helicat sector, and you know, that word is helicopter and snowcat skiing combined. In British Columbia on a normal year, which this isn't, and I'll talk about that in a bit, but we get about 41,000 individual skiers that come to British Columbia, 120,000 skier days. So that means that on average, they're skiing about 3 days. British Columbia is known for its 6-7 day packages historically in heli skiing, and that's how it started. And they're still selling week-long packages. But there's also now snowcat skiing, which a lot of them are selling 3- and 4-day packages, some longer, but there's a lot of shorter trips there. A little bit more economic. The helicopter pricing might come in at, you know, $10,000 to $25,000 a week per person. The cat skiing might come in at anywhere from, you know, 4,000 to 8,000 a week, so it's a little bit cheaper. You get less skiing, vertical skiing in. And the sector has gross sales of about 213 million and an economic output, you know, the multiplier effect and all that, of about 326 million. We have really good numbers from the Helicat sector, and most of the other adventure tourism sectors, sea kayaking, whitewater rafting, whitewater kayaking, canoeing, all that, they have less kind of emphasis on this, and they've got less accurate numbers, if you like. The Helicat sector employs 2,850 people. It's seasonal. So if you kind of add those all up into 12-month jobs, there's about 1,800 FTEs, full-time equivalent jobs in that sector. And they pay about $15–16 million tax revenue. Now, one of the characteristics here that's unique for adventure tourism, and a lot of them, is that it's what we look at as rural development, rural community development. And a lot of my work around the world, whether it's Iceland, Greenland, Patagonia, Moldavia, I mean, it doesn't matter where, they're seeing it as an economic driver. So if you're in Patagonia, Patagonia does not have resources like oil or forests and mining, the kind of things that Canada might have as an alternative resource industry. They just don't. So when they look at tourism, it easily becomes, you know, one of the main focus areas for them from an economic development perspective. But in British Columbia, it's the same. The towns of Revelstoke and Golden and the Cusp and Rossland and Terrace and those communities, the adventure tourism sector plays a pretty substantial role in generating employment and developing rural communities, right? And so it plays a kind of really significant role in the development of employment and those economies in the rural communities. I mean, downtown Vancouver isn't a big adventure tourism product. There are some, you know, tied to the hotels, and there's some great Indigenous product downtown that's connected and stuff as well. But for the most part, this is a rural kind of piece, right? So Helicat Canada, I spent about 40% of my work time for them, is a trade association for helicopter and snowcat skiing. In British Columbia, there are about 18 different industry associations. And what I mean by that is sea kayaking has an association, which is the companies, right, that band together. Whitewater rafting does that. And these are the power groups in many ways. And they do a number of different things depending on the association. So they might do the training of guides or instructors. They might do the certification. They might do the lobbying and the advocacy. And Helicat Canada also does accreditation. So it doesn't train the guides. There's 2 other associations who do that, but they do the accreditation of the businesses. So to operate as a helicopter or snowcat business, to be a member of Helicat Canada, you actually are meeting their standards. You're being inspected by them, and they're doing the business accreditation as well. So that's a little bit different. Most of the other associations don't do that. But then all 18 of these groups band together and they form a lobby group, what we call the Adventure Tourism Coalition. And that coalition represents that $4 billion of adventure tourism sales. So when we go to Ottawa to lobby the federal government, or we go to Victoria to lobby the provincial government, we will quite often do that as a coalition strategically. That's very unique in the world, to have 18 associations that work together as a lobby group, as an advocacy group, for sure. Now, when you're doing your project, if you were to pick a helicat business or a guide outfitting like hunting or salmon fishing or sea kayaking or those kind of things, a lot of these businesses are 100% sold out from year to year. So heli skiing and cat skiing are sold out 100%, more than 100%, 2 to 3 years out for the most part. And their pricing is in that $6,000 to $25,000 a week. So if you're a business student, and you start going, okay, well, this is the perfect high yield, low volume business from a sustainability perspective, right? And a land impact perspective and stuff. This really makes a lot of sense. You can make money at this with relatively low volume. But all these other sectors are quite similar in both pricing and in their ability to fill their product. Now, 25 years ago, helicopter skiing stood out as a fairly exceptional kind of product. Today, that $15,000 a week pricing is pretty normal. Actually, I work with lots of different places that are in that kind of price range as well. So from a COVID perspective, here's the problem. Those guys are sold out 100%, 2-3 years out, but 90% of those guests are foreign guests. So we've got COVID, we've got a closed border. The helicopter sector this year will operate at about 10, maybe 15% of normal. Most of the businesses won't run. We've got a couple of lodges that are running. We've got any of the companies that are doing day heli skiing, like attached to a ski hill, that kind of thing, that are running a little bit. But generally speaking, this is a foreign business. And it's exactly the same. When I talk to my colleagues at the guide and outfitters, the hunting, or the salmon fishing, or the bear viewing, or those kind of things, they might not have 90% foreign guests, but they might have 70 or 80. So the impact of having the border closed is really significant and has been. So in 2019-20, last spring, the helicat sector lost 30% of its income. This year, it's probably lost 90%. So instead of 41,000 skiers, we might have 4,000 skiers. So that's the difference the border makes and that COVID has made to them, right? So one of the big things that you're looking at is how does an adventure tourism business swing, right? How do you actually swing? And if I'm a business that has 90% foreign guests, what am I being asked to do? Well, last June, right, the Canadian government said, well, all businesses are asked to pivot to a Canadian market. So the adventure tourism industry, anybody with foreign guests, that's what they did. And then in October, COVID got worse. We had a second kind of thing coming along. Now they're asked to only sell to British Columbia markets. And then in December, they're asked, oh, let's pivot to a local regional market, which means within 100 kilometers, 150 kilometers. You're asking a multi-million-dollar business to do this every 3 or 4 months, right? They're supposed to swing their entire marketing recruitment program, their entire focus on guests. And this changed 3 different times, right? Now, how will this be relaxed? Well, it's going to be long and slow for sure. So when will the Canadian border open to American guests, which are 50%, let's say, of the adventure tourism industry in British Columbia? This is really tricky. all right? Because it's going to be science-based. I was on a call last week with Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Border Patrol, and the Canadian Border Services Agency. These are the people who will make the decision. And they're saying the decision to open the borders will be science-based, and the science is completely immature. We don't even know whether people who have received the vaccine can still transmit the virus. So there's lots of questions. And when's the best case scenario for the Canadian border to be open? Great question. Next fall at the earliest for sure. Maybe longer, we don't really know. So for smaller local adventure tourism businesses, right, who have a strong Canadian market, they might be okay. So if I'm a snowcat business and 40% of my guests are Canadians, I might be able to swing. If I'm a sea kayak business and 60 or 70% of my business is from Ontario and Alberta, I might be able to swing, right? But for the ones that have a strong international focus, really, really difficult. So this doesn't really matter, but if we had Canada, 21 million international tourists, 14 million, 2/3 of those are from the US. So for us, really to kickstart the adventure tourism sector here going forward in the short, medium term, like in the next 6-8 months, we need the US border to be open. And that's complex. You guys understand as much of that as I do for sure, right? And there's the statement that I got last week from all the border guys. The border will remain closed until the pandemic is contained and the science is mature. Canada's a little conservative. British Columbia is probably even more conservative than a lot of other provinces. They are going to open the border really slowly and really carefully. So what does that leave, right? It leaves the big companies with 90% foreign business out to lunch. The smaller guys that have a more Canadian thing, can we get the provincial borders open so that we can start marketing back into Alberta and Ontario and those kind of places? Because that's a significant Canadian adventure tourism market. But barrier-free travel, that's not happening anytime soon. So lots of people believe it's not happening till spring 2022. So from the Helicat sector, we're going to lose another winter. So that's 2.5 full seasons. And that's what's happening right now for the adventure tourism businesses that are summer oriented in British Columbia this coming summer. Is they've already lost last year if they have foreign guests, and some of them are looking at losing this some summer. Surviving 1 year with no income is one thing. Surviving 2 years is something completely different, right? So, where does this all go? It's a really great question. So there's other kind of factors here in the adventure tourism industry that are pretty interesting, actually. Yes, it can be lucrative, but it requires the ability to build equity because most employee wages are relatively low, and most of them don't have great benefits, and most of them don't have pensions. You need to be working for a pretty substantial company in a pretty stable position in order to be getting good benefits in that. Now, one of the big things is that they're building equities in lodge, right? In land tenure, in exclusive clientele, and in businesses that are sellable. And don't kid yourself, exiting an adventure tourism business and selling it for what it's worth is a very difficult thing. There's probably 400 or 500 adventure tourism businesses for sale right now in Western Canada. And the people that own it and built it up over a long period of time don't know how to get out because it's tricky. You sell it to an investor, they don't know the adventure tourism business, and the lifestyle guides that have been working for them for a bunch of years probably don't have $3 or $4 million to buy it. So exiting a business is a really tricky thing, and the barriers to that are a little more complex than what people think. This is a lifestyle industry, and many people will work long careers as guides and owners because of the lifestyle. I mean, I got into this business 47 years ago. There wasn't an industry, right? So it was more a lifestyle piece. It certainly wasn't because of money. There's no doubt about that. things have changed a little bit today, and guides are asking questions about what kind of money can I make. That's something newer in many sense, right? So when I started out, you had to be an entrepreneur to be successful in the adventure tourism industry. It's not the case today. You can be, there's still entrepreneurial opportunities, but you can also make it as an employee. These companies are big, lots of them. They hire employees. You can have an entire career at one company. And that's really common. It's way more common than being an entrepreneur in that sense these days. Hard to get in. So what are the characteristics of the adventure tourism industry today? Well, international border mobility. So you need that. You need to be able to cross borders here, and you need to be able to travel internationally. $1,500 will buy you a plane ticket anywhere in the world these days. And so that's what's driving tourism, is the ability to get somewhere cheaply. Species at risk management, land access and tenure security, a very tight insurance market and getting worse right now. There's only a few insurers that will play in the adventure tourism market. It's just not profitable. It's not that there's so much risk that they lose a lot of loss cases, because that's not necessarily true, but there's just no money in it, right? In terms of the amount of premiums that they get. First Nations reconciliation is really in Northern Canada and in Western Canada, British Columbia, become a real focus point. Climate change, resource use conflict, sustainability challenges, and the owner's ability to exit. I would say that these things are the long-term questions. COVID's just a short-term thing. I mean, we'll be past this in the next year or two. But it's these things here which are the long-term and day-to-day realities for the adventure tourism companies these days, right? So those are the things that over the mid to long term drive the whole adventure tourism thing, and what the lobbyists and the advocates and stuff work on. So these 18 associations in British Columbia I talked to you about, this is where the executive directors from those businesses and the boards of those associations are focused, right? Is on these kind of things. And I would say that this one here, species at risk, caribou, mountain goats, wolverines, those kind of things, grizzly bears, that completely will impact and is impacting how many tourists you can take on the landscape and how many businesses can be there. And land access and tenure security is absolutely necessary. And yet it's not that secure. Outside British Columbia, very few places have a permitting process that you can get secure access to the land base. So from an adventure tourism perspective, these are the kind of challenges, the opportunities as well, right? Now, from a business perspective, if you figure out how to address those things as an entry barrier, it actually will increase the value of your business. And then if you figure out how to be able to exit, then that will also increase the value of your business. So that's me on Everest in '91. Spent some time over there, and in the old days when I was younger, that's kind of what my life was. So what's the future? All right, just to summarize this and wrap it up and see if you have any questions. The future is really interesting because, we've, over the last kind of 50 years, heli skiing is 50 years old this year. So it kind of predates a lot of the contemporary adventure tourism. So I would say that the contemporary adventure tourism sector is really about 50 years old. And everything has been developed in that time period. So, what does this look like kind of going forward, right? Well, it's an interesting thing because it's sold as adventure tourism. It's no mistake that other language has cropped up, like the Wilderness Tourism Association. It's not called the Adventure Tourism Association. It's called the Wilderness Tourism Association because it's actually a little bit more holistic and it's broader in that sense. But what do you have to do to be successful in an adventure tourism business? Because adventure actually, entails some risk. That's the very definition of it. And as soon as you remove all of that, you're not really necessarily selling adventure. You might be, but you might not be. Now, I would say that helicopter skiing is one of the few sectors that you can't remove the risk 100%. There's fatalities every year in the heli ski sector. There's helicopter crashes, there's all that stuff. So there's some of that that fits in there. So one of the questions, how do we protect the culture of the adventure sports and the adventure industry? Because to be successful, a business has to commodify it. You need to be able to run it in volume. You have to be able to make it relatively safe, and you have to be able to make it predictable. If I work in Northern Labrador with the Labrador Inuit and the Nunatsiavut a lot. I've been in there 16 years. They run trips into Torn Gap Mountains National Park, up the Labrador coast. They are having an incredibly hard time commodifying that because they can't guarantee that you can fly there because the coastal fog is just so thick. So you can sit in Goose Bay for a week and not be able to get off the tarmac. So it's not predictable enough for tour operators or even consumers to come to there in the volume that they need. So you need to commodify it, right? You need to make it predictable, and you need to be able to do it in volume. Otherwise, you don't have a business. You got some activity, but you're never going to make money at it, which is, you know, one of the goals here. The lifestyle doesn't trump everything. So we still need to make some money. So selling perceived risk is not really selling real risk. And, you know, the definition of adventure includes hazard and risk. So if you're not selling hazard and risk, you're selling something else. And you need to kind of philosophically decide kind of what that all is, right? So you start to develop ecotourism and that kind of stuff, which is why I think a fairly holistic term like the Wilderness Tourism Association that you're working for right now as a consultant, that's what you are. There's your consulting future starting out. You're embracing a kind of broader segment of that. So one of the big futuristic challenges is that government has no comprehension. They do not understand adventure tourism particularly at all. There's no government policy that supports it and develops it, right? That encourages it, that draws investment to it. In British Columbia, the ski hills have that. They have a government department whose job it is to encourage investment and to encourage ski hill development. But beyond that, the adventure tourism sector has nothing in that sense. And then there's other resource interests that will and are increasingly becoming issues here. First Nations and transfer of land back to them by treaty and by court judgment and other ways. Species at risk, which I talked to, will trump business on the land. Another thing that will trump business on the land is public recreation. You will not displace public recreation with a commercial business. Just philosophically, these three things here, First Nations, species at risk, public recreation, will severely impact the adventure tourism industry going forward. And in some cases, will kill businesses who've been on the landscape for 20, 30, 40 years. They will get trumped and they will get removed because of these three other competing uses, if you like to say that. So advocacy, the kind of lobbying and stuff that I mentioned I'm involved in, will become more and more important going forward. And so there's something for you to kind of think about in your careers in that sense. Now, all of you have seen the Butler model of destination development and tourism development, and this is it, right? The number of tourists increase, and you could change the number of tourists to, you know, business income or whatever, and it goes through these different stages, and clearly it completely does. But if you look at the left side of the slide, and I think this is my kind of last slide, as a sector matures, it moves from this lifestyle and exploratory origins. This stuff down here, this is done by adventurists, right? down here. They kind of look at a new destination, or they look at a new place, they go to a new place, they develop a new activity, or that kind of thing. And then it moves up the curve to a more professional business model. And it goes through a period of time here, years, where it's under development. And then you start to consolidate the whole thing. And then this is where you actually make your money, right? You make your money up in here once you've commodified this, and it's a viable product. So this whole kind of piece, this adventure tourism sector, this is my sales pitch to you as business students. And I taught at university for 26 years. The adventure tourism industry needs more of you. I'm recruiting you, right? Because it needs more business expertise. So what does it need? Well, it needs the skills of a mature industry, because I mentioned earlier, 45 years ago, it was done by entrepreneurs, right? People who were trying to build a lifestyle, didn't understand business. I'm included in that, right? I got my business degrees later once I realized what I really needed to know and didn't know. And so the skills of finance, marketing, HR, supply chain management, how to draw investment, how to do logistics, project management, forecasting, currency exchange, because it's an international business, managing shareholders, managing growth, international business, customer service. Those are the skills that it now takes to run a successful adventure tourism business. Very different than 50 years ago in that sense. But what I will say is, if you target the large adventure tourism businesses, they have staff in all those things. You go to Mountain Equipment Co-op here in Canada, or REI in the States, you know, they're upper echelons. They've got a dozen full-time economists, right, that are doing currency exchange and foreign currency purchasing, and all of their down for sleeping bags and everything. It's all sourced internationally. So they've got international buyers and all that stuff. It's that level of business understanding that will keep the sector going forward over the next bunch of years. Okay, I'm done. Thank you for your attention. I appreciate it. And I'll let Michael or somebody, if there are any questions in the chat. I'm not looking at the chat right now. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Ross. Yes, let's open up the floor to some questions. We'll take maybe say 3 questions or so in the chat box. So give a couple of seconds to get your thoughts organized. And we'll read out the questions to Ross and keep track of what's going on. So Ross, it was interesting. Marcel has a question. He has his hand up. Do you want to use your microphone then, Marcel?
Hey,
I thought so, yeah. Hey, Ross, thank you so much. Very interesting presentation, phenomenal. I was wondering, when you're saying 90% of tourists are coming from, well, mostly international, sometimes all of them, and we definitely want to make a large impact even after this whole COVID situation is over. My thought is about, when we are looking at engagement and at awareness, because we learned that lots of local people don't know what's going on, right? So in what way do you believe, out of your information, would people be interested to adjust and pivot their existing business models, because they can see an end to all of this, right? So is it just a band-aid you put on top overall right now, or are you really focusing on generating additional revenue streams, making sure that you are not as reliant of these international tourists? Obviously, they bring a lot of money, right? But what's your take for the next 2 years? Just on your opinion, is it beneficial to do a business degree? I don't think so right now, right? It's just people don't have time for that. They need immediate support and adjustment. So having a long-term solution might just not fit. It's not feasible. It has to be quick. So changing a whole revenue stream or a business model can be a lot of work for lots of people who say, I don't do this because I know that cash will be flowing in 2 years. I'm just closing off temporarily, which is what we want to prevent, right?
Yeah, it's a great question, Marcel. The adventure tourism businesses that are high foreign percentage of guests, right? The pent-up demand here over this year, let's just say the winter opens next winter, the heli ski sector and everything else that is foreign oriented is going to be completely pent up demand. They're going to be overrun. They're going to be trying to increase volume over that 100%. They're going to raise prices. They're going to be more profitable than ever. And you're not really making the same amount of money off the Canadian guests as you are on the foreign necessarily. And so, that's one of the realities. The truth is that the Canadian government has this Canadian wage subsidy. And without that, and that's what's keeping the businesses that are operating going. Nobody's making money right now. And so that wage subsidy enables them to keep their employees hired, which helps the business, right? But it also helps the mental health and everything from that employee. What I'm hearing is without the wage subsidy, which currently is going to end in June, none of these businesses would be operating this winter. And it ran last summer. It kept the summer businesses going. It needs to continue and be extended. So that's the one thing. Without the government subsidy right now, none of these businesses would operate in the short term. And you're absolutely right. It's a great observation. Why would they swing? All they're trying to do is to survive until the borders open. And when the borders open, they know they're going to be profitable again, and they're going to be overrun more than ever, quite frankly. It's not like it's going to be slow. The pent-up demand for adventure product is unbelievable. So they're not going to run off and do a degree. They're not going to run off and do a 2-year diploma and say, okay, I'm going to do that. They need the kind of help that this competition is doing, bringing some really great ideas and having other people work with them. The consulting industry right now is booming because most of these people are lost in terms of what to do in that sense.
Yeah, this helps a lot because as I said, it's more like a band-aid solution. And in my opinion, obviously there's 70 people in this, right? So,
Marcel, I'm going to cut you off just so we can get one more question. Thank you. We have another question online from Serena, and she's asking specifically, how would you include Indigenous communities in government policy? And I would extend that to say, how would you include Indigenous communities in working on solutions in the short term, medium term, and long term when it comes to adventure and wilderness tourism?
Yeah, great question. Look at this a little differently in BC than the rest of Canada, but Indigenous tourism product across Canada is exploding. It's absolutely exploding, right? But not all of it's successful. There's a skills challenge there as well, right? They need to learn how to do this whole business and tourism thing, and some of them really are. But in British Columbia, we've adopted the UN Declaration for the Right of Indigenous Peoples. The Inuvik band just did that yesterday. But in British Columbia, they've ensconced it as an act in BC. And so it's in everything, and it needs to be, and going forward, it will be. Indigenous communities, there's a few things here. They're going to be really conservative and really slow opening up to foreign travelers again, which means the tourism businesses who are operating there are probably going to open slower than everybody else who's not attached or in an Indigenous area. That's one. And the other is you really need to look at adventure tourism as an economic economy that the Indigenous communities and areas can adopt, because it's right down one of the kind of industrial sectors that they can do well. And I think there's a real synergy there. And we're seeing lots of partnerships there. And Helicat right now has a consultant project, a substantial one out, that'll be done by summer, which is developing an Indigenous relations strategy for the whole helicopter and snowcat ski sector. How do we engage with them better and get them involved in what we're doing? I would say it's just a huge focus right now. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. It's just coming up